So I got a lot of questions on how I cut the lace of a closure and just basically on ventilation in general. So I decided to make this into a series where I just explain everything ventilation. And this is going to be the first part of the series. Yay! And I titled this How to Cut the Lace of a Closure. Yeah, I'm making a 4x5 closure here, but the method I'm teaching here applies to all sizes and forms of closures when cutting the lace. So watch out for the series, and when you're done with this, do check out the other videos. Thank you. I decided to come here and do more or less like a paper illustration of how a closure is. So this is the net that we're working with here. Okay, this is the net we're working with here, and I'm doing a 4x5 closure. The first thing I'm going to do is to draw the box. That's drawing the box basically is the net, the area you're working with. So let's do that. So guys, I'm here to do a paper illustration on how a closure is meant to be. A closure net is meant to be. This is the box we are working with here. This is the space of the closure. I'm going to be cutting a 4x5 closure. Mainly for closure making, normal mathematics is length times breadth we do for normal mass. But for closure making, it's breadth times length. Meaning this 4 is the breadth, while this 5 is the length. So when I say 4, I mean 4x5. Do you understand? So here is 4 and here is 5. So the width is 4 while the length is 5. I went for a 5 because, like I said earlier in the video, the 5 is like, if you do 4x4, the 4x4, the pattern is usually shorter because base will take a while, take a number of spaces. So 5 makes the doing length 5 makes the pattern kind of longer. So I usually opt for 4x5 rather than 4x4 when I'm advising people. So basically, this is a 4x5. So let me explain how it's cut. When you're cutting this thing, you know it's from back to front that is placed. It's placed from back to front. You're leaving a 0.5 inch allowance round. 0.5 inch, 0.5 inch. Then when you get to the front, you leave 1 inch. So that's usually that space you see in front. That's that big space, extra net that you see in front when you buy a new closure. This is a 1 inch space, while the rest of them is a 0.5 inch, meaning there's a 0.5 inch allowance here, there's a 0.5 inch allowance here, and then there's a 0.5 inch allowance round. These normal patterns are just the spaces in which you will sew the bundles on top. You know, when you're making a wig, you have to leave some kind of little spaces where you sew this thing wefts very close to the closure, but you don't sew on top of the closure. So if you don't leave this space here, you have to sew on top of the closure. This is a pre-cut net, and I think this is 5x5 and this 6x6. This pre-cut net usually has spaces in which they've sewn. Do you understand? So when they say the 5x5, 5x5 is just from here to here. Then these extra spaces that you sewed, these are the extra allowances in which we are leaving here. And this extra allowance is where you sew the bundles on top. So if you're using a pre-cut net, you don't need to go through this whole process of leaving this extra allowance. But since we are not using the pre-cut net and we are cutting our own net from the bulk net, then you have to leave the extra allowances. Does that make sense? So I've given you the structure of how a closure is. Having this in mind, when you are cutting it, this is a 0.5 inch allowance added to the length. This is a 0.5 inch allowance added to the length. This is a 1 inch allowance added to the length. So you're adding a 1.5 inch. That's 1 inch plus 0.5 inch. Do you understand? So you're adding a 1.5 inch allowance to the length of any size of closure you are making. And then this is a 0.5 inch allowance. This is a 0.5 inch allowance. So you're adding 0.5 plus 0.5 is 1. So you're adding 1 inch allowance to the breadth. So while you're adding 1.5 to the length, you're adding 1 inch to the breadth. Someone might ask, where did the 1.5 on the length come from? You know, at the back, you're leaving 0.5 inch. At the front, you're leaving 1 inch. 1 inch plus 0.5 is 1.5 inch. Then at this left-hand side, you're leaving 0.5 inch. At the right-hand side, you're leaving 0.5 inch. So 0.5 inch plus 0.5 inch equals to 1 inch for the breadth. So for any closure making, any closure size you're cutting, you're leaving 1 inch for the for the breadth and 0.5 inch for the length. Meaning, if you're doing 2x4 closure, you know I told you it's breadth times length. It's breadth times length, not length times breadth. So if you're doing 2x4 closure, what you are cutting in length is 3 by 5.5. Do you understand? If you are doing a 4 by 4 closure, what you are going to be cutting is a 5 by 6.5. 1 inch to the breadth and 1.5 inch to the length. I've wasted this page. Now that we are doing a 4 by 5 closure, we are adding a 1 inch to this place and 1.5 inch to this length. So what we are cutting is a 5 by 6.5. Do you understand? So when you measure this full thing, just know that when you are cutting it, you are cutting the length to the 6.5 while you are cutting the breadth to the 5.5. So by the time you minus all the extra allowances, it's going to give you your exact 4 by 5 measurements. Do you understand what I'm saying? Then center pattern here.
So with this illustration in mind, we are good to go to cut the lace. And the first now I usually do is to put a masking tape on the block head. This particular one, there was already masking tape there, so I just put more to extend it, simply because I was working with a wide closure and I needed the masking tape to be wide enough so all the holes in the closure can show. So this is the lace I'm working with. This is a transparent Swiss lace. I usually opt for this color of the Swiss lace simply because I can use a lace tint or a lace tint mousse or something to tint it to the client's shade. The next step then is going to be the cutting of the lace. So like I said earlier, it's a 4 by 5 closure I'm doing, so I'm going to be measuring it a 5 by 6.5 because of the extra allowances I'm going to be adding. So having that measurement in mind, you're just going to mark the areas for the 5 and the areas for the 6.5, then you cut. I want you to have something in mind. When marking the net, you're marking the net in a vertical manner, meaning the holes on the lace, they are arranged in a vertical manner. So you have to ensure that the holes are really in that vertical manner before you cut the lace. If you don't do that, you will not be able to work with the net, because the net is going to be useless, as you cannot ventilate a closure when the net was not cut in a vertical manner. So having that in mind, you just take your measurements, and once you're sure that okay, yes, the measurement is accurate, you can cut it. You don't need to make the net very smooth and stuff, because the extra allowance, so in case there's any issue with the net or stuff, it's going to affect just the extra allowance and not the main side of the net. And if you notice, I'm cutting at the edge of the net, I'm not cutting in the middle of the net. This is simply because I'm trying to manage the net. These laces are quite expensive, and you just cut it at the edge just so the net is not going to waste and you can still use it reasonably for other closures. Like a half yard net can make over like 10 to 15 closures, if I'm not exact, if not more safe, because you manage the net properly. The next step here is going to be cutting the part that was already marked. I told you, once you measure the part of the net that you know you're going to be working with a chalk, you just mark it and then you cut. It's important to note that since this is a pre-cut and this is a full yard of lace, maybe the edges of the net may be frayed, the edges of the net may be cut in a certain manner and stuff. You can easily skip those parts, but in a situation where you cannot skip those parts because maybe you're managing the net or something, it doesn't matter because there's a 0.5 inch allowance at the edges, so it's not like it's going to affect the closure itself. Do you understand? So in case there are holes at the edge of the net, because that typically happens, you just know that okay, that's only going to affect the extra allowance and not the main net. So having that in mind, you just cut it and you're good to go. After which, what I usually do here is I just take out my scissors and I smoothen out the already cut lace. In a situation where maybe when we're cutting the lace, it bent, or just to ensure that it's a little bit straight, you just smoothen it out and stuff. It's not compulsory, but it's just always best. You basically have to place the net on top the blockhead where you've already put your masking tape. You have to place the net there, pin it on all the angles, smoothing it out, and basically all that.
So if you've watched my previous video, I'll link that video below, where I was teaching you guys how to make a 2x4 closure. You realize that what's making a 2x4 closure and making a 5x5 closure it's kind of the same. That's making a 2x4 closure and making any kind of closure is kind of the same. The only difference is that for this other kind of closures, the front has a frontal effect. So you have to leave a space in front for the frontal effect. So apart from that, it's kind of the same.
So yeah, I'm just trying to show you guys how the marking of the closure comes out. Are you guys seeing the extra allowances? Then you're seeing the center pattern. How I got the center pattern is dividing the breadth into 2. So if the breadth is 4, you divide it into 2. If it's 6, you divide it into 2. So if dividing 4 into 2, you're getting 2, 2, and 2 is the left, 2 is the right. That's how you get the both sides. Then the middle of it is how you get the center pattern. See the physical illustration on the closure itself. So if you're asking how I get my center pattern, that's exactly how I get my center pattern. Then you can make the center pattern wider depending on how you want it to be. Then when it comes to the base, you divide one side of the 2 into 2, and that will give you 1 and 1. So you're dividing one side, let's say you're dividing the left hand side into 2 to get 1 and 1. So the part that you get, you mark it as the middle, and you're drawing that slant, that diagonal line. So that's how you get this shape. By the time you do it to the left, you do it to the right, you're getting this shape on the both sides, then the middle. So that's how you usually get this pattern that is formed on the base, if you guys can see it here. That's how you usually get this pattern. So after that, what you will now ventilate all the base, and you ventilate it towards the back. If you have any questions, just leave it down in the comment section, and I'll be very, very nice to answer your questions. Then you get to the body of the closure. I told you that, guys, that you're doing 10 lines of base, so all the 10 lines of base is going to the back, after which you're doing your body of your closure. For your body of your closure, okay, see the base here. I'm just showing you guys how the base came out here. Though I'm still ventilating here, but I'll show you guys how the base came out. Then I've started the body of the closure here. The body of the closure, I'm doing a diagonal pattern. I'm just doing a diagonal pattern, all going slant, 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 slant. And that's basically how you get your body of the closure. Initially, it doesn't get to the center pattern. It goes like 3 or 4 lines before it gets to the center pattern. But once it gets to the center pattern, it continues that way. So by the time you ventilate and you get your body of the closure, you close the closure. If you don't close the closure, you will not be able to do the frontal effect, because it's going to just look funny. After you close the closure, then you get to the frontal effect. You're going to mark a 1.2 inch space for the frontal effect. Now, frontal effect part, I'll still explain it in the next video. This is the plain net area where I had done only 1 or 2 lines of base, and I just came to show you guys the marking on the closure itself. Can you guys see the space, the place where I told you you're going to do a diagonal pattern for the base, the slant line? Then you can see the center pattern. Then you can see the 0.5 inch allowance all round. Then you see the 1 inch allowance in front. This is just basically the pictorial illustration of how the pattern of a closure looks like. In the next video, I'm going to be explaining a detailed explanation of how I made this 5x5 closure, so do check it out. Thank you.